Hi, this is Corey Garza from Cal State Monterey Bay, and today I'll be talking to you about some of the challenges that we have in terms of diversifying the ocean sciences, but also the opportunities that are available to us. So many of us may be familiar with these data that come out of the ocean sciences, but in case you don't, this is a recent survey that NSF had about a few years back where they surveyed to try to understand the actual diversity of the ocean science graduate student community that was out there. And what they found was approximately about 13% of graduate students who were surveyed identified as being from an underrepresented group. And when you look at the biological sciences, you see that they have a slightly higher percentage, about 18%. Now, you may take a look at that and think, well, that's not such a big deal. But when you look at the whole number comparison, that's when you start to see how big a gap there actually is. That 13% of underrepresented students translates to about 379 total students compared to over 9,500 in the biological sciences. And there was a report on this that came out in 2018 in Nature Geoscience by Bernard and Cooperative, where they looked at the lack of sort of progress on diversity in the geosciences over the last 40 years. And what they found, as you can see there in field A, is that the ocean sciences do kind of lag in general as a subfield. But when you look at the race and ethnicity within some of these geoscience related fields, you can see that white non-Hispanic groups are actually the majority of people who are getting these degrees. And so when you actually go into the underrepresented groups, you can actually see how big a gulf that is. There's very little movement in groups such as Native American, Black, non-Hispanic. The only group where it appears that there's some increases are Hispanic or Latino. And if you see that little red circle there, the reason I have that is kind of a personal reason. I'm one of those 5 Hispanic or Latinos who got a PhD in the geosciences back in 2001. Now, why do we see this low diversity? Well, in terms of student populations, there's a number of general causes that I've looked at over the years. One, a lack of personal connection. In some cases, students just don't feel connected to some of the issue that's around the ocean sciences, because oftentimes there are actually more important things that are more relevant to their communities. There can also be an unclear understanding by students of what actually happens in the ocean sciences. Oftentimes, some of the stereotypes of an ocean scientist is, whether you're a scuba diver, working at an aquarium, that tends to be sort of the mindset, not something we might think about in terms of the general research science areas. There's also can be ineffective messaging and engagement, particularly at the early undergraduate stage with students. These 2 pictures here kind of represent what I'm talking about. That image on the left there is a traditional oceanographic graduate school brochure, a bunch of guys on the deck of a boat hauling some gear around. I Googled construction jobs, and the image on the right is what showed up. If you look at them, the 2 images don't look that different, especially maybe if you're a student who comes from a blue-collar construction family background. Both those images are conveying the idea that ocean sciences is hard manual labor. Maybe that's something you don't want to do. You're also conveying a lot of other messages that are kind of unintentional. One, maybe if you're physically disabled, you're not able to do this. Maybe you got to be a guy in this case. There's a lot of messaging that issues that we also have to deal with. Then also there tends to be this historic overemphasis of certain fields, the biomedical sciences that get pushed onto students and underrepresented communities who want to go into STEM. So there's a lot of opportunities though for improving how we do DEI in STEM. One, issues around messaging and student engagement, thinking about how to diversify the career options that we sort of present to students, and also thinking about leadership development in the people who are actually sort of enacting a lot of these DEI initiatives. So SACNAS is a group that I've been involved with for about the last 18 years or so, and this is the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science. It's the largest diversity in STEM society, and I've been working with their general ocean science, geoscience programs for about the last 18 years. Now, one of the things that we were challenged with is SACNAS has a large biomedical student population in it. And so it took us a better part of about a decade to actually sort of build out the ocean science presence. And in the last few years, we started to build out the broader geoscience presence there. One of the programs that we've been using is something called Geofutures. And part of what we do is we provide funding for students who participated in the broader geoscience RU network or similar programs. And part of what we're doing here is we're trying to help build a community within this particular society to help students understand that they're actually part of a larger community of underrepresented students in the ocean sciences who are pursuing both degrees and professional opportunities right, in this field. And so we match up our students with geoscience mentors at the conference to help them navigate it. We have a lot of really cool conference-based sessions attached to it. And then we actually have a lot of post-conference student support to help them sort of maintain a lot of the intellectual sort of development engagement that they had at the conference. I also sort of think about how we kind of diversify the career tracks that we put students into. There can oftentimes in the ocean sciences be a push to sort of more academic or these kind of traditional academic routes. So one of the things that I run is a Noaa Cooperative Science Center. So this is a program run by Noaa's Educational Partnership Program. And in large part, what it's designed to do is to help Noaa sort of diversify its future workforce. And so what they do is we actually train students in a lot of training as undergraduates and graduate students in a lot of the different types of technologies and approaches that Noaa is going to be looking for in its future workforce. Right, and here on this slide is just sort of one example of our student success stories. This is Alexandra Thompson. She's a recent master's student here at Cal State Monterey Bay. And what she did is she actually worked on a marsh restoration project with our colleagues at Elkhorn SLU using drones, geographic information systems, and statistical modeling to really help the SLU group understand where the most optimal place is to enact coastal restoration within this really large wetland habitat that's there. Turned into a really wonderful thesis, and she was actually recently awarded a position as a California Sea Grant State Fellow, where she's continuing to work within a number of estuary projects here in the state. And so what she's actually put herself onto is a professional pathway working in these type of NOAA-related ocean science workforce type development programs. Finally, we also have to think about, how do we improve sort of leadership around sort of diversity work that we're doing in the ocean sciences? And so another program I'm involved with, something called AGU Landing, relatively new program that actually provides a virtual platform of resources to support DEI efforts both inside and outside of academia. The big thing that we do is we actually support a 2-year cohort program for DEI leadership in geoscience, and we actually just accepted our first group of participants. And so we support engagement of actually these cohorts and DEI efforts within both the American Geophysical Union, more broadly within other STEM societies where DEI efforts are trying to be enacted. And so this gets to a larger issue, is that we also have to start to think about how we reframe our own personal STEM identity. This quote here, I'm not an educator, I'm a researcher. This is an actual quote from a colleague when I actually asked him about doing DEI work. And oftentimes we can actually frame it as either I'm a researcher or an educator. I can't be both. But it is possible. I have this picture here. This is a colleague of mine, Josh Kohut from Rutgers University. He's well known within the research community as somebody who works with gliders, telemetry data. There's a lot of work looking at sort of penguin movement down in Antarctica. But we were also part of a large education program known as Polar Ice that was funded by the National Science Foundation, wherein what we were trying to do was actually bring the science of the polar regions actually to schools where they actually didn't have access to it. And so this is Sim here. We were hosting a workshop at Moss Landing Marine Labs where he's working with K-12 instructors here on how they could actually download things like Argo data, upload it to their own computers, and actually turn into lesson plans for their students around topics like things like chemistry, biology, ecology, and so on. And so it is possible to do this. And so really what this means is that engaging in DEI work doesn't mean sacrificing your own research. This is a screenshot actually from one of our social media pages for my own research group. One of the things that I do is in addition to my own DEI and education work, I also run a really large coastal drone program here at CSU Monterey Bay that gets a lot of use up and down the coast. And so it is possible. And so it is one of these things where rather than think of these things working in opposition to each other, we have to think about how DEI work and traditional research can actually work in concert with each other. And so part of doing DEI work is also thinking about how you operationalize your DEI work. Right? And so if you're going to get into this type of work, you have to think about allocating reasonable funding and staffing so that your DEI efforts are well supported. They shouldn't be things that you do on the side. You also have to think about engaging collaborators who have a history of working on DEI. Right? An example of an organization that does this really well is Advancing Research Impacts in Society, ARIS. It's an NSF center, and what they specialize in is helping you do these types of efforts here. And so there's lots of groups out there that can actually help with this. You also have to think about including active strategies for your own DEI work. In other words, don't assume that being affiliated from someone from like a minority serving institution will automatically strengthen any DEI work that you want. Like for example, this picture on the bottom here is a program we run at SACNAS, it's Conversation with Scientists, where it's a large professional networking event that we run with scientists who are in attendance at SACNAS from across all the geosciences and students. And so they get to interact with each other, try to understand each other. Students learn about all the different career opportunities that are out there. And the scientists that are there, they get sort of exposed to this really large group of talented students that they didn't know were out there before. Also, you want to make your DEI collaborators an integrated part of the research team, right? Don't keep them off as sort of just way off to the side and you contact them when you need something. They should always sort of be part of the overall research team. Then you also want to think about how DEI work is rewarded within your own organizations. And oftentimes, especially in academia, this can actually be a big barrier. It's not unusual for people not to get tenure credit, right, for doing DEI work or getting credit for publications around DEI. So this is another barrier that we have to think about overcoming. The other question that we have to ask ourselves is who to include. And so one of the things we have to recognize is DEI can focus on more than just race, ethnicity, and gender. Right? We have to think about what are other groups we should start thinking about working with. Right? Consider working with other groups that are underrepresented in STEM. US veterans are one group. This photo on the right, this is Ashar Sanchez. So she was a US Air Force veteran who was also a participant in our research experiences for undergraduates program here at Monterey Bay. She came to us from Rutgers, did a really great job in our program, and now she's currently in the master's program at Coastal Carolina University. Think about individuals with disabilities, right? There's a group called International Association for Geoscience Diversity, and so they specialize in improving access to geosciences, the ocean sciences, right, for those with disabilities. Because oftentimes things like the ocean sciences can be presented as something where you have to be physically able, right, to participate. And one of the things that they work on is how to sort of remove some of those depictions, but also create a space that's really inclusive of everyone, regardless of their physical ability. LGBTQ plus groups is another group that we often overlook, but it's another group that we want to start to think about. Then also just think about how is your own work actually connecting with broader society, the different groups that you want to work with? But that's something we often overlook. How valuable is our own work to actually these communities that we want to work with? And so that's something also that we have to think about considering when we're doing this type of work. Finally, in closing, like why do we need to do more broadly? Why DI in science? Well, one, it improves the diversity of those who engage in STEM. And in doing that, what you're doing is you're actually helping to bring new ideas and perspectives to our fields. And what that actually results in is resulting in new ways of conducting research, finding new cool results and new ways of doing research, improving our understanding of how ocean systems operate. So thank you for taking time to listen to my talk, and I look forward to interacting with everyone during the main session later today.